curses upon every lie, every slight, every smug smirk, roared Ebony's conscience, a silent thunder in her mind. She clenched her fists, stifling an outburst that threatened to boil over at 30,000 feet. Not a single cloud was in the sky outside her airplane window, but a storm of tension crackled within the cabin. A simple flight to Atlanta, a peaceful plan to read a novel and enjoy her VIP seat, none of it was supposed to end in chaos. Yet here she was, trembling with anger as a flight attendant stood before her, demanding she give up her rightful seat, just for someone else's convenience. Ebony Thompson was exhausted beyond measure. She had been on a whirlwind business trip for her venture capital firm, Thompson & Rose, hopping from conference to conference in 3 different cities in under a week. The last leg of her journey was a flight from San Francisco back home to Atlanta, where her grandmother was waiting with a home-cooked meal and the promise of peace. Ebony had splurged on a first-class VIP seat, something she rarely did, except when she felt truly battered by travel. For once she needed comfort and rest. At 32, Ebony was a force of nature in the business world. Her intelligence and fierce determination had catapulted her to managing partner at Thompson & Rose, a firm she'd co-founded with her college friend, Ariana Rose. Ebony was admired for her clear vision, quick wit, and no-nonsense approach to dealing with corporate bureaucracy. That same unwavering backbone had also made her a target of envy in some circles, especially in the predominantly white, male-dominated finance sector. She had navigated microaggressions, passive-aggressive commentary about her abilities, and sometimes outright discrimination. Yet, she had conquered every obstacle, building a reputation that soared higher than the planes she frequently boarded. Today, Ebony boarded a Delta Airlines flight, with weary limbs and a hopeful heart. She was done with the presentations, the endless streams of questions from potential investors, the labyrinth of corporate dinners. She found her seat 2A, a plush throne of respite stowed her carry-on overhead and carefully settled her laptop bag under the seat. Everything was routine until it wasn't. From across the aisle, Ebony caught the gaze of a flight attendant whose name tag read Loretta. Loretta's pale blue eyes flicked over Ebony in a quick assessment. Something in that look made Ebony's spine tingle, but she brushed it off. She'd dealt with a dozen flight attendants that day alone, and this one was probably just verifying that Ebony was indeed in the right seat. Ebony fastened her seatbelt, exhaled, and let her eyes slide closed. She had 15 minutes before takeoff, precious time to indulge in the quiet hush of first class. The overhead lighting was gentle, and Ebony could almost feel the tension draining from her body. If her phone hadn't buzzed at that moment, she might have drifted off. It was a text from Ariana. "Remember to finalize that Berlin deal. Don't worry about the rest. I got you. Safe flight, Ebony." Ebony smiled. Ariana and she had come a long way from their dorm room brainstorming sessions at Howard University. They'd promised never to let each other fail. That comforting thought hovered in Ebony's mind right up until she heard the approach of footsteps. When she opened her eyes, Loretta was standing over her, arms crossed, tension etched into her posture. "Ma'am," Loretta said stiffly, "is everything all right here?" Ebony nodded politely, perplexed at the question. "Yes, everything's fine, thank you." The flight attendant paused, lips pressed into a thin line. "We might have a request for your seat." It was Ebony's turn to frown. "My seat?" She straightened. "I'm in 2A, correct?" Loretta cleared her throat. "Yes, but we have a passenger who specifically asked if someone in 2A would be willing to switch seats. They want to sit next to their companion." Slight confusion riddled Ebony's features. Usually, passengers with a companion would already book adjacent seats. Ebony had seen it many times, families wanting to sit together, couples requesting side-by-side seating. She'd often yielded her seat in economy class if the flight was short and the request was polite. This was first class, though, not a free-for-all, and Ebony had paid top dollar for the peace she deserved. Is there some reason this passenger can't just sit in their assigned seat? Ebony asked, attempting to keep her voice cordial. Loretta hesitated. She specifically wants 2A. She's flying with her fiancé, but they got separated in the booking. He's in 2B and she's back in 7E. She said she prefers the window seat, especially in the front of the cabin. You know, it's more comfortable. For a moment, Ebony mulled this over. If the passenger's fiancé was in 2B, the seat next to Ebony, then the woman seeking Ebony's seat was presumably assigned to 7E. Ebony considered if it was a small inconvenience. But then she remembered why she chose 2A. It was away from the bustle of the galley, and Ebony was tired. This was her own comfort, her reward for the grueling past week. "I'm sorry," Ebony said with a firm but polite tone, "but I'm not willing to switch. I specifically booked this seat for a reason." Loretta's face remained passive, though Ebony sensed a flicker of something like annoyance, maybe even hostility. "I see," Loretta said. "I'll let her know." Ebony nodded and let her gaze drift out the window. She thought that was the end of it. But as the minutes ticked by, she caught a hint of commotion near the curtain that separated the first-class cabin from business. She spotted a white woman, tall with sleek blonde hair, standing next to Loretta and pointing in Ebony's direction. Their hushed whispers carried the weight of indignation. Ebony's heart sank. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd simply refused to give up the seat she paid for. It was a common scenario. Passenger asks, passenger politely declines. End of story. But clearly for that white woman this wasn't the end. Ebony tried to tune out the conversation. She checked the time on her phone, 8 minutes to take off, thinking the situation would resolve soon. But it was only a few moments later when the passenger in question, who Ebony would later learn was named Harper Caldwell, marched up the aisle and planted herself in front of Ebony. I just wanted to talk to you face to face," Harper said, voice dripping with forced sweetness. "I'm traveling with my fiancé. He's here in 2B, and I was hoping we could switch seats. It would really mean a lot to us if we could sit together." Ebony exhaled softly, keeping calm. "I'm sorry, but I need this seat. I chose it for personal reasons, and I'd like to remain here." Harper's manicured fingers gripped the headrest of Ebony's seat. "I totally get it, but you're alone, right? I mean, there's no real difference between 2A and 7E other than being, well, up here." She tried a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and obviously, it's not a long flight. Ebony's jaw tightened. She'd recognized this brand of entitlement far too often, where someone expected her, a black woman, to yield simply because they said so. Ebony took a measured breath. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I won't switch." For a second, Harper's smile broke. She stared at Ebony with open incredulity, as if Ebony had just said something offensive. Harper's fiancé, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline and wire-rimmed glasses, hovered behind her, looking distinctly uncomfortable. He mumbled something, perhaps urging Harper to let it go, but Harper persisted. "You can't be serious." Her voice had taken a sharper edge. "My fiancé and I have an important wedding to plan, and this is our last trip before we finalize details." This was supposed to be our chance to sit together and talk everything through. She let out a theatrical sigh. "You're telling me you won't just let us have your seat for a couple of hours?" Ebony felt her blood simmer. She forced herself to remain calm, to respond with civility. "I'm telling you I won't give up the seat I paid for. I'm exhausted and I'd like to rest. That's all." For an instant, Ebony swore she caught a flicker of hatred in Harper's eyes. The blonde turned on her heel and stomped away, fiancé in tow. Ebony allowed herself a small, relieved sigh. Perhaps now that she had directly spoken her refusal, Harper would leave her alone. But Ebony was naive to think that was the end. In a matter of minutes, Loretta returned, stooping beside Ebony's seat as Ebony scrolled through her phone's emails. Loretta's voice came out lower this time, with a forced courtesy. "We'd like to know if you would please consider moving so we can avoid a scene." Ebony's ears burned. "A scene?" she echoed, voice tinged with incredulity. Loretta gave a one-shoulder shrug. "Harper's upset. She's got her fiancé up here. It's their engagement trip. Emotions are running high." She drew in a careful breath, as though Ebony might be the one losing control. "We really want to keep everyone happy." "I get that," Ebony replied, "but maybe you can offer them an upgrade to another seat in first class if that's available. Or see if someone else in first class is willing to trade with her. Or they could just sit separately for this flight. This seat is important to me." Loretta's lips thinned. "We're trying to handle it in the easiest way possible, and that's you moving." Ebony bristled. She removed her reading glasses, leveling Loretta with a calm but unwavering stare. "Ma'am, I've told you I'm not moving. I'm not obligated to accommodate that passenger's preference. If the seat is so important, maybe she can pay the fare difference or solve it in another way. I'm not going to be bullied out of my seat." Loretta's face set in a stony expression. "I see. I'll have to tell the passenger." With that, she turned and walked off, leaving Ebony's nerves jangling like a frayed wire. As Ebony eyed the flight attendants clustering in the galley, she couldn't help but feel singled out. The cabin was dotted with other VIP passengers who, presumably, would also refuse to move. Why was Ebony's seat the prime target? The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing preparations for departure. The flight attendants hurried to close overhead bins and enforce seatbelt compliance. Ebony allowed herself to hope that perhaps the matter had been dropped. She pressed the back of her head against the seat, eyes shut, praying for a peaceful takeoff. But as the plane rolled onto the runway and engines roared to life, Ebony's sense of tranquility was shattered by a single, piercing stare from across the aisle. Harper Caldwell was fuming. The flight attendant, Loretta, was fidgeting near the cockpit door. Something told Ebony this flight would be anything but peaceful. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, Ebony tried to settle in. She had a half-finished novel. She'd been reading a political thriller that had enthralled her until the demands of real life overshadowed fiction. She flipped open her Kindle, determined to ignore the mental static caused by that earlier drama. But peace never truly came. Loretta made her rounds, offering first-class beverages and distributing warm towels. When she reached Ebony, she halted, her features as bland as unseasoned broth. "Would you like a beverage?" Ebony nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Water, please." Loretta poured a glass from a small pitcher, her movements brusque. She set it down on Ebony's tray table, not bothering to ask if Ebony wanted anything else, then moved on to Harper and her fiancé in the next row. Ebony's ears picked up Harper's saccharine voice. "Could I get a mimosa, please? Something to help me calm down after all that stress." All that stress, Ebony thought, shaking her head. It was unbelievable that the request for Ebony's seat, which Ebony had politely declined, was being spun into such a dramatic meltdown. Ebony turned back to her Kindle, focusing on the words until the hush of the cabin and the gentle hum of the engines lulled her senses. She felt the exhaustion creeping in and allowed herself to drift. It was an hour into the flight when Ebony was stirred awake by the clatter of a serving cart. She blinked, adjusting to the overhead light. The flight attendants were handing out meals in first class. Ebony accepted the tray, which was set with a small salad, grilled salmon, and roasted vegetables. She realized, belatedly, how hungry she was. As she lifted a forkful of salmon to her mouth, Ebony overheard hushed voices coming from the seats behind her. She couldn't decipher all of it, but she caught fragments of conversation from Harper, who was speaking to her fiancé and possibly to Loretta, who hovered nearby. Point still can't believe she wouldn't move. It's not about the money, it's about courtesy. Some people just act so entitled. Ebony's teeth clenched. The hypocrisy of being called entitled by the person demanding she give up her VIP seat was too rich. She forced herself to swallow the bite of salmon and remain composed. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw Harper's fiancé stand up and approach Ebony. Ebony set her fork down, bracing for the confrontation. The man's voice was subdued, apologetic even. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for any trouble. Harper's upset because she thought we'd be side by side. She's got some anxiety issues, especially in flights. If you could just—" He paused, clearly seeing Ebony's expression stiffen. Ebony recognized a flicker of genuine embarrassment in his eyes. She might have been sympathetic if it weren't for the blatant disrespect from Harper and the flight attendant. "Look," Ebony said quietly, "I understand she's anxious, but the answer is still no. I can't accommodate that request. I paid for this seat with a lot of intention. I've had a very long, difficult week, and I want to rest." He nodded heavily, rubbed his brow, and glanced at Harper, who was glaring from her seat. "I get it," he said at last, retreating. "I'm sorry." The entire spectacle was growing ever more exasperating. Ebony found a spark of pity for the fiancé. But what about Ebony's own right to be left alone? The flight continued, and Ebony tried to focus on her meal. She sent off a quick email to Ariana, giving an update on her flight status. The Wi-Fi connection was spotty, but it allowed Ebony to push through some urgent emails, hoping to distract herself. Yet every time Ebony glanced up, it felt like Harper was sending flaming daggers with her gaze. Halfway through the journey, Ebony decided to stretch her legs. She unbuckled her belt and headed toward the restroom in the first-class cabin. The plane was quiet, with only muffled conversation and the hum of the engines. But as she exited the restroom, Ebony nearly bumped into Loretta, who stared at her with an odd mix of condescension and impatience. "Excuse me," Ebony murmured. Loretta stepped aside. "You know," she began in a low tone, "if you changed your mind now, you'd still have time to switch seats. The passenger in 7E's seat is actually pretty comfortable. And you'd be doing the right thing for a couple that wants to be together." Ebony swallowed a wave of resentment. "The right thing," Ebony echoed, raising an eyebrow. "So me staying in the seat I paid for is the wrong thing?" Loretta's silence spoke volumes. Ebony's hands balled into fists at her sides. She tried to keep her voice calm. "I don't appreciate being pressured like this. I've made my decision. Please stop." The attendant sniffed. "I'm just saying there's a social courtesy aspect that some people neglect. These seats sometimes go to people who don't necessarily—" Ebony's eyes narrowed. "Don't necessarily what?" Loretta's cheeks flushed slightly. She turned away. "Never mind," she muttered, and hurried off. Ebony stood there, her heart pounding. The insinuation was clear. Ebony, a black woman, apparently didn't deserve first class. She swallowed, trying to steady her breathing. She couldn't let this pass unchallenged, but she also wanted to get home in one piece. The only consolation was that she'd be off this plane in a couple of hours, and hopefully this nightmare would end. By the time Ebony returned to her seat, Harper and her fiancé were quietly talking, their heads bent close. Ebony put in noise-cancelling earbuds, letting the hum of classical music wash over her. She returned to her novel, determined to ignore the negativity swirling around. But fate had other plans. A short while later, Ebony felt a light tap on her shoulder. She pulled out one earbud and looked up to find a second flight attendant, a younger man with a name tag reading Darren, offering her a small slip of paper. Ebony stared at him questioningly. Darren leaned in. "Message from Miss Caldwell," he whispered, as if what he was doing was questionable. Then he turned and walked away. Ebony unfolded the slip of paper. Written in neat, looped handwriting was, "I will pay you $200 if you move to my seat." Let's not turn this into something it isn't. Ebony's jaw dropped. The gall of it was staggering. Did this woman truly believe Ebony was so desperate for cash that she'd hand over her first-class seat for a couple $100? Ebony's ticket had cost far more than that, and even if it hadn't, the principle alone was insulting. She crumpled the note in her hand, her pulse racing in anger. Harper seemed to be watching for a reaction. Ebony turned, locked eyes with Harper, and shook her head firmly. She mouthed the word "Number Harper," rolled her eyes, and huffed, dramatically turning away. Ebony placed the note inside the seat pocket. A slow burn of righteous fury lit up her chest. She remembered every time someone had questioned her presence in elite spaces. She remembered the subtle racism cloaked in politeness, the persistent need to prove she deserved to be where she was. Ebony inhaled, exhaled, and tried to will the tension away. Soon this flight would be over, but trouble brewed again when Ebony realized Loretta was talking to the cockpit door. Another flight attendant, this one Ebony recognized as the head attendant. A man named Greg stepped out. Loretta whispered something to him, pointing in Ebony's direction. Ebony's stomach clenched. She watched as Greg nodded slowly, walking over to Ebony with a stern, practiced flight attendant smile. Greg's voice was low and soothing, as if Ebony were a child. "Ma'am, I understand there's been some conflict about seat assignments. Is there any chance you'd be willing to resolve this amicably?" Ebony stared at him, annoyance boiling over. "I'm sorry, but I've already told the other attendant and Miss Caldwell that I'm not moving." Greg held up his hands. "I understand. I'm just trying to de-escalate. We don't want any unpleasantness on this flight." Ebony forced a smile. "You could de-escalate by telling Miss Caldwell the matter is settled. She's offered me money and has repeatedly pestered me. I'm a paying passenger who's done nothing wrong." Greg nodded, though Ebony sensed his sympathy might be superficial. "Yes, we'll look into that." He paused, his tone dropping. "But if this continues, we may have to ask one of you to leave the aircraft when we land." Ebony's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me? Why me? I'm not saying you specifically," Greg said hastily. "It's just if the situation becomes disruptive. We have procedures." Ebony's voice came out in a trembling hush of anger. "I'm not being disruptive. I'm sitting here, minding my own business. The only disruption is from them." Greg exhaled through his nose. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Ebony bit back a retort. She watched him leave, stepping over to Harper's row, presumably to give her a similar warning. Ebony could see Harper's fiancé nodding vigorously. Harper, on the other hand, appeared outraged, though her voice was now too low for Ebony to hear. Ebony closed her eyes. It was unbelievable. She had done nothing wrong. She was being pressured, cajoled, and threatened for politely declining to give up her own seat. The knowledge made Ebony's stomach twist. She felt a swirl of emotions, anger, indignation, and a toxic brand of sadness that left her feeling powerless. She was not powerless, though. Ebony remembered who she was, the influence she had. She opened her phone's contacts. Slowly, purposefully, she scrolled until she found a name, Rachel Mays, one of the top legal counsels Ebony's firm had worked with. Someone with extraordinary clout. Ebony stared at the number for a moment, considering the ramifications of calling mid-flight. Perhaps, Ebony reasoned, she should wait until they landed. But Ebony's gut told her that if the flight attendants continued their harassment, something bigger might erupt. Then Ebony thought about how exhausted she was with the subtle racism, the constant struggle to be respected. Enough. She typed out a detailed text message to Rachel, describing the situation, the flight number, and the repeated requests from the flight staff. She hinted that she might need help if they tried to remove her from the plane or otherwise penalize her. With the uncertain in-flight Wi-Fi, Ebony wasn't sure if it would send, but she tried anyway. Moments later, Ebony's phone vibrated with a brief reply. "Heard. I got your back. Keep me posted." Relief flooded Ebony. A small flicker of empowerment glowed in her chest. Whatever happened, Ebony wasn't alone. The rest of the flight was tense but uneventful. Ebony managed to doze for about 30 minutes, ignoring the glares from Harper and the occasional scowl from Loretta. Finally, the captain's voice announced the descent into Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Ebony felt her spirits lift. She was close to home, close to freedom from this fiasco. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Ebony noticed Loretta and Greg exchanging glances. Harper and her fiancé were collecting their bags, muttering under their breath. Ebony prepared herself. She had no idea what might happen next, but she braced for confrontation. Sure enough, once the seatbelt sign was turned off, Greg announced over the intercom that first-class passengers should remain seated until the aisle was clear. Harper stood up anyway, ignoring the directive. Ebony watched in astonishment as Harper gestured furiously at the staff. The fiancé tugged on Harper's sleeve, trying to calm her. Another flight attendant gently ushered Harper back to her seat, but Ebony sensed there was more drama brewing. Eventually the plane door opened, letting in a waft of fresh air and the clamor of the jet bridge. Ebony collected her bag from the overhead bin, determined to exit quietly. She stepped into the aisle, only to be blocked by Loretta. "Ma'am, could you just hold on a second?" Loretta asked. Ebony's mouth tightened. "Why?" Loretta lowered her voice. "We need to document the incident before you leave." "Incident?" Ebony repeated, eyebrows raised. "You mean me refusing to give up my seat?" Greg appeared behind Loretta, nodding. "Yes, we have to file a report. Standard procedure." Ebony exhaled, her frustration mounting. "Well, I don't have time for that. I'm due to meet someone." She had no real meeting scheduled, but she was beyond done dealing with them. "If you need a statement, I'll provide one via email." "Thank you." She tried to step around, but Loretta sidestepped to block her. Ebony's heart hammered in her chest. Other passengers from the business class section were also starting to filter forward, blocked by the confrontation. A rush of shame and anger flooded Ebony. She was being singled out in a public setting, as though she was some kind of offender. "Don't make this difficult," Greg said, raising a placating hand. "We just want a quick statement so we can finalize the internal record." Harper and her fiancé were standing behind Ebony now, able to disembark but evidently choosing not to. Harper's lips curled into a smug smile, arms folded. Ebony realized that if she complied, she'd be subjected to more scrutiny, as if she had done something wrong. If she refused, it might escalate even further. Ebony took a steadying breath. "Fine," she said at last. "I'll make a statement, but make it quick." Loretta led Ebony into the empty first-class cabin seats. As the rest of the passengers streamed out, Harper hovered close, although Greg tried ushering her away. Ebony sat down, crossing her legs, her arms folded. She could feel the swirl of anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "All right," Greg said, flipping open a small notebook. "We need your full name and a summary of what happened." Ebony stared at him in disbelief. "My name is Ebony Thompson. I boarded with a valid first-class ticket. Miss Caldwell asked me repeatedly to move, offering me money at one point. I refused each time. The flight attendants also repeatedly pressured me. I was called disruptive for not yielding." "That's all that happened." Greg scribbled notes. Loretta stood behind him, face taut. Finally, Greg looked up. "And you have no regrets about your actions?" Ebony bristled. "Excuse me. I regret the stress, but I have no regrets for occupying the seat I purchased. I didn't violate any rules. If your concern is about Miss Caldwell's discomfort, perhaps you should address that with her, not me," Loretta sniffed. "We'll note that down." Then they turned to Harper, who promptly launched into her own performance. She was so rude, she refused even when I offered her money to be nice. People these days have no heart, and the flight attendant just tried to fix the situation. "I felt discriminated against," Ebony nearly choked on the irony of that last statement. Finally, Greg closed his notebook. "All right, Miss Thompson, you're free to go." He looked thoroughly exasperated, but Ebony no longer cared. She stood and shouldered her bag. Before Ebony could leave, Harper made a parting shot, voice loud enough for Ebony to hear. "It's people like her who ruin travel experiences. Some folks just don't know how to be kind." Ebony paused for a heartbeat, refusing to dignify that with a response. She walked briskly down the empty jet bridge, a swirl of relief and fury swirling inside her. The airport air felt thick and stale, but it was freedom compared to the tension on that plane. Once she was past the gate, Ebony spotted her phone lighting up with a missed call from Rachel Mays, her legal contact. Ebony dialed back immediately, stepping to the side so the flow of disembarking passengers could pass. "Ebony," Rachel said the moment she answered, "I got your text. Are you still on the plane?" "No," Ebony replied, a tremor in her voice. "I just got off. They tried to hold me back for some incident report. It was humiliating." Rachel's voice hardened. "I'll handle it. Let's see if we can get any flight recordings or witness statements. Text me the details and I'll make some calls." Ebony's relief was tangible, like a weight lifting off her shoulders. "Thank you, Rachel. This was so messed up." Rachel exhaled. "No one's allowed to harass a paying customer like that. Don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of it. I have a friend over at Delta Corporate. We'll file a formal complaint." Ebony hung up, her heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and gratitude. She took a moment to calm herself before heading to pick up her luggage. She had no idea how big this would become, but if Ebony had learned anything in her career, it was that sometimes you had to stand your ground, not just for yourself, but for everyone who might face similar discrimination. Little did Ebony know, that simple phone call was about to ripple through Delta Airlines in ways she never imagined. By the time Ebony made it home, it was nearly midnight. Her grandmother was asleep, but she'd left a plate of cornbread and greens warming on the stove. Ebony ate in silence, replaying the day's events in her head. She'd done all she could. Now it was in the hands of Rachel and the legal system if Ebony wanted to push it that far. The next day, Ebony awoke to her phone buzzing incessantly. She grabbed it off the nightstand and squinted at the screen. It was Ariana, calling bright and early. "You won't believe what's happening," Ariana said, breathlessly. "I'm seeing your name trending on Twitter." Ebony shot upright in bed. "Wait, what?" Ariana rattled off details, apparently. Another passenger on the flight had taken a short video of the confrontation, a snippet capturing Ebony saying, "I'm not moving from the seat I paid for," and Harper retorting, "You're so rude." Then the camera panned to the flight attendant, who seemed to side with Harper. The clip was posted with a caption about how a black woman was bullied in first class for not giving up her seat. Within hours, it blew up on social media, with commenters outraged at the apparent racism and entitlement. Ebony's heart thumped. She leapt out of bed and opened her laptop, scrolling through Twitter. Sure enough, hashtag Ebony Thompson and hashtag First Class Fiasco were among the trending topics. People were calling out the injustice, with thousands of comments praising Ebony for standing her ground, while others were lambasting Harper and the flight attendants for discrimination. By midday, Ebony's phone was inundated with calls, some from unknown numbers, presumably reporters seeking a statement, others from business associates offering support. Ebony's email inbox pinged with potential interview requests. It was overwhelming. Ebony had never sought public attention in this manner. She was a behind-the-scenes businesswoman. Then came the big phone call, Delta Corporate, from a number Ebony didn't recognize. She answered hesitantly. "Miss Thompson?" asked a measured voice. "This is Simone Wakefield from Delta Airlines. We'd like to sincerely apologize for any inconvenience or distress you experienced on flight 523 from San Francisco to Atlanta. We're conducting an internal investigation and would appreciate your cooperation." Ebony didn't respond right away. In the background, her grandmother was calling her to breakfast. She nodded at her grandmother, gesturing she'd be there in a minute. "Is this regarding the repeated requests for me to move seats?" Ebony asked slowly. "Yes, Ma'am," Simone replied. "We've received social media complaints and have launched a thorough investigation. The flight staff involved will be placed on temporary leave pending results. We'd like to offer you compensation, a full refund and additional flight credits, and ask for a detailed statement about what happened." Ebony swallowed. The speed of the corporate response was staggering, but she attributed it to the viral video and the intense backlash. "I can provide a statement through my legal counsel," Ebony said, her voice firm. "I won't do anything else until I've spoken with her." Simone murmured agreement. "Of course, we respect that. Please, let us know how we can rectify the situation." Ebony ended the call with a polite but curt tone, her emotions swirling. A day ago, she'd been powerless. Now, the entire incident was a national conversation. She wasn't naive. She knew that social media outrage was fueling Delta's swift response. Regardless, Ebony was determined to see justice done. The flight attendants had discriminated against her, Harper had harassed her, and Ebony wanted an official apology that wasn't just hush money in the form of flight credits. In the days that followed, the story only grew bigger. National news outlets picked it up. A major daytime talk show briefly covered the incident, showing the viral video and discussing how public spaces often default to privileging certain demographics over others. Experts weighed in on the subject of discrimination in travel. Harper Caldwell's name was eventually exposed in the media, sparking fierce debate on social platforms. Some of Harper's own acquaintances came forward to defend her, claiming she wasn't racist, she just had anxiety issues and was misunderstood. Others pointed out that Harper's sense of entitlement was all too familiar. Meanwhile, Ebony tried to maintain her routine at Thompson and Rose, but the phone didn't stop ringing. After consulting with Rachel, Ebony agreed to a single interview on a local Atlanta news station to clarify the facts. She didn't want to be the face of every conversation about racism, but she felt a responsibility to stand up for herself and others who faced such treatment. When Ebony did the interview, she spoke calmly, stating the facts about what transpired on the plane. She described the repeated requests from Harper, the pressure from Loretta, and the threat of removal from the flight. She ended with a gracious note, voicing her hope that the airline would take steps to prevent similar incidents in the future. The interviewer commended her poise, especially given the harassment she'd endured. Then, one morning, Ebony got a startling text from Rachel. "Remember that friend I have at Delta?" He says heads are rolling, big time. Apparently the internal investigation turned up some shocking revelations. Ebony's heart fluttered. She dialed Rachel immediately. Rachel explained that not only were Loretta and Greg likely to face serious disciplinary measures, but Harper had apparently raised an even bigger stink with the airline, threatening lawsuits unless Ebony was penalized. In the process, Harper hurled remarks that apparently left a paper trail of hateful language. Rachel's contact discovered that Harper had ties to some fairly influential people who tried to stifle the story, but it only fanned the flames further. "Delta is furious," Rachel told Ebony. "They're firing the entire flight team that worked in first class that day. Loretta, Greg, Darren, everyone who was complicit. The airline can't afford this bad press." Ebony felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She didn't want people to lose their livelihoods, but the accountability was long overdue. Racism and discrimination had costs, and sometimes those costs included losing a job when you violated professional ethics. Rachel continued, "There's more." The fiancé apparently contacted a PR firm, claiming Harper's meltdown was because she felt threatened. That only made them look worse, especially after the video evidence showed the exact opposite. So now the couple is under public scrutiny. Sponsors for their upcoming wedding, which was rumored to be a lavish social media sponsored event, have pulled out. They're losing deals left and right. Ebony sank into her office chair, letting the reality wash over her. The chain reaction was unstoppable once the video surfaced, revealing the truth. Harper and the flight crew thought they could bully Ebony with no consequences. They were wrong. Karma was hitting back, hard. The day Delta released its official statement was the day Ebony felt the last puzzle piece settle into place. The statement read, "Delta Airlines extends our sincere apologies to Miss Ebony Thompson for the distress she experienced on Flight 523. Our investigation confirmed that certain members of our flight staff acted improperly and did not uphold Delta's commitment to respectful and equitable treatment for all passengers. Effective immediately, these employees are no longer with the company. Delta will be implementing additional training on anti-discrimination policies and best practices to ensure incidents like this do not recur. We thank Miss Thompson for her patience and cooperation, and we have reached out to her personally to offer our amends." When Ebony read that statement, she felt conflicting emotions: relief for being vindicated, sadness for the harshness of seeing a team fired, yet also a sense of triumph that maybe, just maybe, her standing up had created a shift. Even if it changed only a few minds, it was better than nothing. Harper Caldwell tried to fight back in the court of public opinion. She posted a tearful apology video on her social media, now private, claiming she never meant to offend Ebony, that it was all just a misunderstanding. But screenshots surfaced of text messages Harper had sent to a friend, bemoaning the entitled woman in first class and making references that Ebony didn't look like she belonged there. Public sympathy for Harper evaporated. The brand sponsorships she and her fiancé had lined up for their wedding dried up. The fiancé's tech startup, which had pinned hopes on a positive brand image, suffered a downturn in user engagement. The fallout was swift and brutal. As for Ebony, her grandmother's home became a place of refuge. Reporters occasionally staked out on the sidewalk, hoping for a comment, but she politely declined interviews beyond the one she'd already given. She did, however, accept Delta's formal apology in a private meeting with corporate representatives, where she reiterated that she wanted structural change, not just public relations band-aids. Delta offered Ebony a settlement that included not only a refund for her flight, but a substantial amount of flight credit and compensation. Initially, Ebony considered turning it down. She didn't want people to think this was about money, but Rachel advised her to accept. "You can donate it if you like, or use it to invest in philanthropic work," Rachel suggested, "but refusing it won't change what happened." Ebony, always practical, agreed. She used a portion of the settlement to fund an initiative at her old college, Howard University, a scholarship program for students of color pursuing careers in aviation and travel hospitality management. She hoped to encourage more diversity in the airline industry, planting seeds of change from the ground up. Meanwhile, Ebony's own life returned, as much as it could, to normal. She poured herself into the Berlin deal with Ariana, traveling to finalize negotiations. Though each flight stirred a pang of anxiety now, Ebony carried herself with renewed confidence. She had demanded respect and gotten it. One evening, weeks after the incident, Ebony sat on her grandmother's porch swing. The Atlanta night sky glimmered with stars, and a sweet Georgia breeze caressed her cheeks. She sipped peppermint tea, letting her mind wander through the tumultuous events. The attention from social media had mostly died down, though Ebony still received the occasional supportive message from strangers who felt moved by her story. Her grandmother joined her, settling onto the swing with a gentle sigh. "Child, you've been through a storm." Ebony smiled softly. "Yeah, but I made it." Her grandmother patted her knee. "I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. The world sometimes needs a reminder that we have our place at the table or on the plane, And we ain't giving up our seat for no foolishness. Ebony chuckled, leaning her head on her grandmother's shoulder. The memory of that day still stung, but it was also a catalyst for conversation about racism, entitlement, and fairness in public spaces. Though Ebony never intended to be a spokesperson for these issues, she recognized the weight her actions carried. "I just hope the next time someone else faces a similar situation," Ebony said. "They remember they're not alone." Her grandmother nodded. "Yes, baby. And now that you've shown them how to handle it, maybe folks will think twice before trying that again." Ebony let out a long breath. "I hope so, Grandma." Months later, Ebony found herself stepping onto another Delta flight, this time heading to New York for a major investment conference. She wore a tailored blazer, her hair styled in long, flowing braids. She felt a hint of trepidation as she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, but the woman greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Thompson." Ebony thanked her, moving into the cabin. The seat number on her ticket read 2A again, a deliberate choice. A different set of flight attendants worked this route, and they treated her with professional courtesy. No fuss, no drama. Ebony settled in, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. As the plane ascended, Ebony gazed out the window. A swirl of clouds parted, revealing the vast, sunlit horizon. It was a new day, full of possibility. Ebony remembered the darkness of that flight months ago, how she'd felt cornered and belittled. Now, she was stronger, armed with both personal resolve and public vindication. She had forced a giant corporation to reckon with the behavior of its staff. She had turned a moment of despair into a catalyst for change. And that, Ebony thought, was a victory no one could take away. The flight to New York was uneventful and peaceful, just as Ebony always wanted her journeys to be. From her vantage point in the sky, she took in the endless blue and thought of all the other travelers who might be battling demons of their own, be it discrimination, self-doubt, or social pressure. In that moment, Ebony silently wished them the strength to stand firm. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the engine cradle her into a serene reverie. Her phone, placed on airplane mode, was tucked away in her purse. She had no calls to answer, no immediate battles to fight. Just the open skies, and her unwavering spirit, a reminder that sometimes one call, one stand for justice, was all it took to make the world a little fairer. And so, Ebony Thompson's saga ends not with bitterness, but with growth for her, for Delta Airlines, and for all who witnessed how a single act of standing firm can ripple through corporate giants and personal lives alike. From a tense airplane confrontation to a viral media storm, Ebony's refusal to yield her CIP seat laid bare an age-old truth: dignity isn't negotiable, and neither is justice. In the aftermath, accountability struck those who acted with entitlement and prejudice, sparking overdue changes that might protect the next passenger in her shoes. If this story resonated with you, stand with Ebony. Let's keep these conversations alive. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more tales of empowerment, resilience, and justice. Together, we can amplify the voices that refuse to be silenced and pave the way for a more equitable tomorrow.